Hi, I'm Neha Devan. Today is the International MSME Day, and EconomicTimes.com is celebrating it in a very special way. The United Nations General Assembly designated 27th June as Micro, Small, and Medium Sized Enterprises Day to raise awareness of the tremendous contributions of micro, small, and medium sized enterprises to the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. MSME Day 2023 marks the sixth anniversary of this General Assembly resolution. As part of the virtual conclave today, we have a series of panel discussions and fireside chats with industry stalwarts lined up for you to get the conversation started. Topics that will touch upon areas that truly matter to India's 63 million MSMEs. Roadmap for building future-ready MSMEs, creating a $300 billion electronics industry by 2026, addressing the financial constraints in the sector, and India scripting its own export-led strategy and how MSMEs can fuel India's next payments revolution. Key areas that can help step up a sector known as the backbone of India's economy. Besides the special virtual conclave, we are excited to announce today that nominations for ET MSME Awards 2023 are now open. The awards, India's most comprehensive and influential awards, seek to celebrate this entrepreneurial spirit and business excellence exemplified by Indian MSMEs. Categories across innovation, performance, and fastest growing MSMEs aim to recognize their resilience and grit. So go ahead and nominate your business today. In partnership with Karur Vyasa Bank and Razorpay, the one-on-one conversations in today's conclave reflect the spirit of India becoming a self-reliant economy. So without much further ado, let's hear it from the MSME Minister, Narayan Rane, on how MSMEs can lead the way for India's growth as an economic powerhouse.
माइक्रो, लघु और मध्यम उद्यम भारतीय अर्थव्यवस्था की रीढ़ है और यह वर्ष 2047 तक विकसित राष्ट्र बनने की भारत की महत्वाकांक्षी की प्राप्त करने में एक अतिरिक्त भूमिका निभाएंगे। हमारी सरकार की महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका पर भी पर्याप्त साक्ष्य है और समर्थन पैकेज ने झटकों को कम करने में अहम भूमिका निभाई है। सतत विकास लक्ष्यों को प्राप्त करने में एमएसएमई की भूमिका का सम्मान करने के लिए हर साल 27 जून को अंतर्राष्ट्रीय एमएसएमई दिवस मनाया जाता है। संयुक्त राष्ट्र के अनुसार छोटे और मध्यम साइज के उद्यम 90% व्यवसायों और 60% से 70% रोजगार के लिए जिम्मेदार है, जबकि वे ग्लोबल सकल घरेलू उत्पादन का आधा हिस्सा है। आज मैं चाहता हूं कि हर कोई लाखों छोटे व्यवसाय की अहम भूमिका और योगदान पर विचार करे, जो हमारे जीवन के हर पहलू की प्रभावित करने हैं। हमारे भोजन से लेकर हमारे द्वारा चलाई जाने वाली कार तक, यह कहना गलत नहीं होगा कि हमारे जीवन में हर उत्पादन में एक एमएसएमई को दूसरे का कुछ न कुछ योगदान रहा है। छोटे व्यवसायों का हमारे जीवन पर अत्यधिक प्रभाव पड़ता है। यह ऐसा समय भी है जब हम यह पता लगाते हैं कि तेजी से ग्लोबलाइज होती दुनिया में हमारे एमएसएमई को कैसा दिखाना चाहिए। हम चाहते हैं कि हमारे एमएसएमई विश्व स्तर पर प्रतिस्पर्धा हो और आज के भारत के छोटे व्यवसाय को तकनीक पर मजबूत होने, उच्च गुणवत्ता देने, रोजगार पैदा करने और इनोवेशन को बढ़ावा देने की आवश्यकता है। मंत्रालय मैन्युफैक्चरिंग प्रतिस्पर्धा को बढ़ाने और एमएसएमई की वास्तविक क्षमता को उजागर करने के लिए विभिन्न योजना और पहल के माध्यम से एमएसएमई का समर्थन कर रहा है। एमएसएमई को नए मॉडल के पुनर्निर्माण और शिल्प के लिए अभूतपूर्व समय में डिजिटल टूल्स और तकनीक को अपनाना चाहिए जो उनके व्यवसायों का तेजी से पुनर्द्वार सुनिश्चित करेगा और भविष्य के लिए तैयार होगा। एमएसएमई मंत्रालय एमएसएमई को बढ़ावा देने के लिए कई तरह की चैंपियन स्कीम, क्रेडिट गारंटी स्कीम, एमएसई क्लस्टर विकास कार्यक्रम, सार्वजनिक खरीद नीति और बाजार विकास सहायता योजना जैसे विभिन्न योजनाओं और कार्यक्रमों को लागू कर रहा है। भारत के 63 मिलियन एमएसएमई के कोर को मजबूत करना हमें एक राष्ट्र के रूप में आर्थिक विकास यात्रा में आगे ले जाने में फायदेमंद साबित होगा। इस अंतर्राष्ट्रीय एमएसएमई के दिवस पर मैं सभी एमएसएमई को अपनी शुभकामनाएं देना चाहता हूं और उन्हें उस लचीलेपन के साथ आगे बढ़ने के लिए प्रोत्साहित करना चाहता हूं जो उन्होंने सबसे मुश्किल समय में प्रदर्शित किया है। एमएसएमई विकासपरक है और जो जीडीपी में अहम योगदान दे रहा है, उन्हें मजबूत करने की आवश्यकता है। इसी तरह हाल के वर्षों में ये ई कॉमर्स के माध्यम से ऑनलाइन बाजारों को बढ़ावा मिला है और इसके एमएसएमई पर सकारात्मक प्रभाव पड़ा है। ई कॉमर्स अपनाने में से एमएसएमई महत्वपूर्ण लाभ प्राप्त करते हैं, जैसे राजस्व और मार्जिन में वृद्धि, बेहतर बाजार पहुंच और नए बाजारों तक पहुंच, मार्केटिंग खर्च में बचत, ग्राहक अधिग्रहण और बेहतर ग्राहक अनुभव। एमएसएमई मंत्रालय भारतीय अर्थव्यवस्था को मजबूत करने और आत्मनिर्भर भारत के दृष्टिकोण से दिशा में काम करने के लिए एमएसएमई और उभरते उद्यमियों को आवश्यक सहायता प्रदान करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। एमएसएमई दिवस के लिए इस वर्ष ईटी राइज द्वारा भविष्य के लिए तैयार भारत के एमएसएमई 100% एकदम सही विषय है। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी के नेतृत्व वाली सरकार ने वित्त पोषण, सूचना, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय बाजार तक एमएसएमई की पहुंच में सुधार के लिए बहुत कुछ किया है। उद्यमशीलता और छोटी फर्म और स्टार्टअप विकास के लिए अनुकूल नियामक, कानूनी और वित्तीय ढांचा प्रदान करना हमारी प्राथमिकता रही है। भारत सरकार ने माइक्रो, लघु और मध्यम उद्यम द्वारा निर्यात बढ़ाने के लिए कई उपाय किए हैं। इनमें मेक इन इंडिया कार्यक्रम के तहत किए गए प्रयास, ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस को बढ़ावा देना, मुद्रा स्कीम के जरिए ऋण को बेहतर उपलब्धता और स्टैंड अप इंडिया आदि शामिल है। भारत की कहानी को हर जगह उत्साह मिल रहा है और यह हमारे लिए इसका लाभ उठाने का समय है। एमएसएमई इस कहानी का आगे ले जाने में महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभा सकती है और हमने उस विजन का हकीकत बनाने के लिए कई कदम उठाए हैं। हम यह भी सुनिश्चित कर रहे हैं कि एमएसएमई क्षेत्र को वित्तीय संस्थानों के बिना रुके क्रेडिट सुविधा, विकास और आधुनिकीकरण के लिए तकनीक सहायता, निर्यात बाजार तक पहुंच और बुनियादी ढांचा सुविधा, प्रशिक्षण और क्षमता निर्माण और कर्मचारियों का कल्याण हो। मैं सभी एमएसएमई को उनके उद्यमों में शानदार सफलता की कामना करता हूं और आशा करता हूं कि वे नवाचार और तकनीक आधारित प्रयासों का अपने लोकाचार के केंद्र में रखने यह समय समय की हम दुनिया को यह राष्ट्र के रूप में अपना ताकत दिखाए और एमएसएमई क्षेत्र इस मोड पर ऐसा करने के लिए तैयार है।
manufacturing is seeing a great push as India looks to become self-reliant and cut down on imports. It has set ambitious targets, with the most immediate one being of creating a $300 billion electronics industry by 2026. But is that achievable, and what are the roadblocks? The next panel discussion aims to find some answers.
If there is one sector that is seeing a manufacturing frenzy, it would have to be the electronics industry. Countries, big and small, have aspirations and plans to garner a bigger chunk of the electronics market, and at the same time, reduce their reliance on China. With ambitious policies, India has also earmarked large sums of money to become an electronics manufacturing. Targets have been set, with the most immediate one of being creating a 300 billion electronics industry by 2026. So how realistic is this? And where are we placed today in terms of manufacturing? To discuss this and more, we have with us today Amrit Madhwani, Chairman and MD, Sahasra Electronics, Nitin Kolyankar, President Emeritus MADE and Director of EPIC, and Amit Bhargava, Partner KPMG. Thank you all for joining us today. So Amit, if I can come to you first, where do you think India is placed in terms of electronic manufacturing in India?
Thank you, Pran, for having me here first, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you. I think this is the most exciting space I've seen in electronics over the last 2-3 decades. I can say that, right? There are fundamentally 3 ways of looking as we look at India from an electronics place. One is its increasing share in the global manufacturing of electronics, right? It's almost tripled in the last 10 odd years. Number one. Number two, significant interest of large global brands to have their say in India. You've seen Foxconn and Apple, so it's all talked about the town, but there are many who have not been talked about, but they're making their place into the country. Number three is the aspiration that the government has put in. I mean, tremendous aspiration, right? I mean, right now we are about 400 million units of phones. We're talking about 1 billion in the next 2-3 years. I mean, audacious, but that's about it. So, I mean, I see a huge amount of enthusiasm and repositioning of the space in the global domain, and a huge opportunity for both make in India and import substitution that can happen here.
Right, Mr. Madhwani, if I can come to you, a lot has been written, a lot has been said about this space. Personally, where do you think India is when it comes to electronics manufacturing?
Well, if you look at the global electronics manufacturing, it's close to $2 trillion. India's share is about 6%, at about $120 billion as of last financial year. So it's only 6%, while we have almost 18% of the world population. So there is tremendous scope for growth of electronic manufacturing in the country. We have, as an industry, tried a lot to enhance our manufacturing over the last 30-40 years, but unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, India signing the ITA 1 treaty, the demand aggregation not being there. Therefore, the industry did not have the potential to grow up until very recently. But now that the post-COVID, the demand for electronic products in the country has increased. Therefore, the total aggregated demand is looking very promising, and Indian entrepreneurs are standing up to the challenge. That is the way I would look at it.
Right, Mr. Kolyankar, what are your views on where electronic manufacturing is?
As regards to the opportunity that exists, yes, we have immense opportunity in front of us, immense potential, both in terms of the domestic market as well as the export market. However, what I have come across, we lack policy integration. Everyone is coming with their policies. The states are coming with their policies, and the center has come out with the policy like PLI. But there is complete lack of integration in terms of driving one common agenda for the nation in terms of making India as a global manufacturing hub or a global export hub. Unless we focus more on exports, India would never become a major electronic manufacturing hub. Mere import substitution policy won't help. You need to integrate many policies, including a demand aggregation policy, as Mr. Manwani has just talked about. For example, today, education, in NEP, you talk about smart education, but there is a huge disconnect. The kind of money government has spent might be genuine, but this lack of focus on deploying technology in education. Education should be a universal subject. For example, universal education is not happening today. And because of the high cost of teachers, high cost of giving education, physical education, we need to go towards virtual education mode very aggressively. The old outdated policies we have to scrap. Now, the reason I'm telling you, once you adopt these demand aggregation policies of smart education, universal education, education for every citizen, not only the basic education, but a fundamental education, an education which will empower them, skill them, develop them, that is missing in this country. It is the prerogative of very few people, maybe 20-25% people get a decent education. So when government will deploy their finances towards technology in giving education, there will be huge demand aggregation. So while you will upskill the country, develop the country on social side, it will also create an opportunity for electronic products demand, and will create an electronic ecosystem. And this is where we are lacking. Same thing is the case of healthcare. Though we say a little bit of increase in healthcare spending in technology, but it's much beyond what it needs to be done. So healthcare sector, the education sector, the social sector spending in technology has to go at least 50 to 60 times of what is being spent today. Even today, our PC penetration rate is low. We are a mobile-driven economy. Mobile is used more. 80% of the mobile usage is for social media. It's not, or for your basic calling. It's not giving you creativity. It's not used as a resource for transformation of people. So we need to create a massive demand aggregation policy, policy integration, a social sector policies, manufacturing policy. Within manufacturing policy, we need to create sectoral policies which are unified. For example, plastic molding. India can be a plastic molding hub. Today, you need not only talk about plastic molding for electronics. It has in electrical, heavy machinery, a lot of other product ranges where all these demand for plastic molding across all sectors could be integrated to make India as a plastic molding hub. China had done this, and there is nothing wrong in learning from them. So we need to apply the same thing in sheet metal. You need to also apply this in semiconductor. Where is a policy today which integrates? So central government comes with some policy, but state are unaware of it. Their policy talks about something else, or they create something which is absolutely on paper, but in real terms, it doesn't work. Jharkhand giving an incentive of 10 crores or 100 crores does not make sense, because there are challenges about working on field in terms of logistics or rule of law or law and order. So industry won't go. So we need to also integrate the logistics of the country. Logistics policies are a welcome step, but if electronic manufacturing has to happen in India in a scale that we need to feed the world, we need to integrate across all sectors.
Right. Sakuntulyankar talks about some of the pressing issues. But on the flip side of it, what are some of the things which make India a favorable destination when it comes to electronic manufacturing? And then, what are the things which are going against us?
So going in favor is first the market dynamics, right? The demand. I mean, significant demand. growth. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, we talk about display modules. I mean, globally, it is growing at about 1 to 2% stagnate. In India, it's growing about 9 to 13%, depending on which size of display modules you're looking at. So there's a huge consumption here in India, very clearly. Second, I think it's very true across industries around the geopolitical situation. There's a diverse supply chain, etc., that we've spoken about in length. India finds itself in sweet spot for more than many reasons, right? I think philosophically, from a democratic to having a willingness to do business. That's number two. Number three, I would say, is now the fact that it's proven that there is a success story in phones, right? Okay. And I think the time is now coming where it will be replicated for IT, for auto electronics, for things which are in the variables and things like that, right? I also feel that the talent, which I think was being talked about earlier, remains the India's biggest strength as well, right? I mean, it's for no reason that some of most of the Indians you see out in the semiconductor space out there doing the leadership position. I see no reasons why that can't happen out here. Now, what really goes against us is that what we're trying to do, and if I just put the electronics in a simple three buckets, right? There is the devices, right? There is the assembly, and there what I call is high-tech manufacturing. Okay. What is not going in favor of India is, without a high-tech manufacturing, you cannot have a sustainable electronic manufacturing, right? You really need both, correct? And I think to the point earlier we made, you really need the semiconductor, the display, the ecosystem around here to support the huge amount of investments happening in the assembly side. I think that's number one. And I think the government sees it, right? Number two is that this is for the first time we're doing it. I mean, if you look at the semiconductor and display, there are only a handful of countries around. So it's, you're getting into a very special bracket. And that first time mindset of having done it is, I think, something which has to be proven. Pram.
Right. Mr. Badwani, the government is actually, like all of you have mentioned, is really pushing manufacturing, and there are schemes like Make in India, phased manufacturing plan, the PLI schemes. What impact is this having on the sector?
Well, I personally believe that it's having a tremendous impact. The success story of mobile phones is known to everybody. Not only the demand, we are able to cater to almost a very large percentage of the domestic demand. But look at it this way, that barely a few years ago, there was virtually no export of mobile phones from the country. And this last fiscal year, there was almost $8 to $9 billion worth of mobile phone exports from the country. And that has primarily been successful because of the PLI scheme that the government initiated sometimes in mid-2020. There are other sectors where similar schemes will definitely bring very positive results. We are aware of the PLI for hardware, IT hardware, that has come about. PLI 1.0 was there, and now PLI 2.0 has been announced. Similarly, there are PLI schemes for LED lighting, medical electronics, for batteries, etc. So all these will go in a long way to create enough interest in manufacturing these products in the country. And mobile is only a small portion of it. But if we look at other sectors, whether it is power electronics, whether it is telecommunication, whether it is solar energy, all these sectors would definitely grow with these government schemes. But the underlying fact that we cannot miss is to develop an ecosystem for component manufacturing. Fortunately, what has happened is that there is virtually no component manufacturing in the country. We're completely dependent, whether it is semiconductors or whether it is passive components like resistors and capacitor, little component manufacturing in the country. if we have to have a sustainable growth in electronic manufacturing, we have to encourage electronic component manufacturing in the country.
Right. Mr. Kumkoliankar, if I can come to you.
Yeah, actually, the advantage India today is polarization of the trade. Basically, China versus almost major countries against China. The markets, the larger markets of the globe are polarized. So I think that offers us one of the greatest opportunity for India. The geopolitical situation, India is now very aggressively signing FTAs. That's another welcome step. India has come out with PLI. All credit to the Honorable Prime Minister and his team. PLI was required, but as Mr. Manwani said, unless we have a value-add based system, it's going to be just transfer of money. PLI, if it is just given for assembly job that you are going to do and just export, it's not going to work for long. The moment PLI stops, your business revenue structure will change, or maybe you will not be inclined towards export. Let me also highlight, when there were incentives given only for manufacturing on a SKD and all, some people, they tried routing the consignments. They just get it from China or Asia, Southeast Asia, just show assembly and route it. When you were getting 4 to 5% incentive, your cost of routing was just 1%. This kind of illegal manufacturing should be banned and prohibited and punished. India has to get into an era of value addition based manufacturing. You can't have simple assembly, but you need to get into component manufacturing, as Mr. Manwani said. And there has to be a policy for relocation of component manufacturing from other developed areas to our areas. There has to be transfer of technology happening in a big way. Current policy need to deal with this. Now, component industry will come only when the finance structure also is very clear. Indian financial system has so far not dealt with this aspect. Electronic industry needs a very specialized support mechanism for component manufacturing. You can't operate with 10% plus, 12% plus kind of financials. The deployment of, if let's say you are achieving a turnover of 500 crores for components, you need equal amount of capital to be deployed there. Unlike assembly, the ratio of turnover versus your capital requirement is very low. But in component manufacturing, it's different. You can't have one PLI scheme which will deal with the same concept, which will deal with both kind of situations. So we need corrections there. We need a massive encouragement. And rather, I would say, again, an integration in components manufacturing also will go a long way. There has to be special incentive package for relocating supply ecosystem from other developed parts to India. States have to come on board along with center. That partnership is very crucial at this juncture. We have to be one. It's nation building. And once this component ecosystem matures here or settles here, India would be unstoppable nation. And the government is looking at it, but industry also has to come forward. And I think this is an era where these things will happen. 5G, the government is trying their best to create an ecosystem here. I think that model needs to be replicated in other sectors also. So besides finance and incentives, logistics also plays a major disability for movement within India as well as for exports. Our port ecosystem is not geared up to handle the kind of exports we are trying to look at in PLI. Let's be very honest. There are challenges at existing exports. You look at the cost of the container, you look at the container handling, you look at the transportation, and from the port to port handling is quite poor, but the transfer of containers from hub ports is costing us a lot. So we are paying a very high cost of freight as compared to other competing nations. So I think government has to work out on export challenges, create atmosphere. Either the government subsidizes or we sign up with the global players to come out with a special India-centric scheme. Today, the container shortage is creating a problem. Still, that indirectly the shortage exists. The port's capability to handle existing volume is not so great. They need to go up by at least 4 to 5 times.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Amit, if I can come to you, if you look at something like the semiconductor space, it's tightly controlled by a few companies and countries. Do you think India can break into such select club?
Yeah, I think it is held by few countries, and it's dominated by a couple of large semiconductor players. I mean, I'm talking about the ones which have foundries. Look, that's why I say that it is very imperative for us to have a play in the high-tech electronics. If we don't, then it's not sustainable. The local supply chain can only happen if these manufacturing of semiconductor and display and related input components are happening in the country. So so give you an example. Semiconductor, you have US, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. Display, I take it along the same line. It's China, Taiwan, Korea. The answer straight to your question is yes, it's happening as we are seeing. I mean, there is example happening as we say. I think this is my experience. I think what is important is for India, both from the corporate and the government, it is to walk the talk. I think in the past we've taken few steps forward and few steps back. I think that has to stop. I think we are seeing a more resolve now. The large corporates probably have to jump into this and say that, look, we can do partnership with the world's best, right? Have the tenacity to bring in the ecosystem that we are talking about. And I think there is a lot of discussion happening at both at the central and the state level. Understand that there is a very specific semiconductor policy which has been out, which almost gives you a 50% capex subsidy at the central, and depending on which states you go to, it can be another 20-25% of capex subsidy. You're really looking at something which is kind of comparable across, right? And the last I would say is that delve into the supply chain of these large players as you partner with them, right? Both from the customer side, because some of the customers that you're talking about are global customers. India is a global electronics player right now, so delve into that. I think those are some of the imperatives I would say to break into that niche of countries that you're talking about, Pran.
And be deft at handling geopolitics?
Of course. I mean, I think that India is right now. I find it to be playing to its card of having this wonderful democracy. When I was growing up, I used to ask myself, why democracy? Now I think it's a great thing to have because it's a great soft power. I think that is probably playing out for India, and I think I mean, we have some capable people around to kind of manage that and navigate.
Right. So one, as someone who operates in this manufacturing space, what would you want in terms of an enabling environment? This is especially for MSME players.
Well, of course, it's general, but also specifically for MSME players. I think there are 3 disabilities that we have to correct. Number one is ease of doing business. And as Nitinji rightly said, there is a disconnect between the center and the states. So with that, it becomes very difficult, for any electronic manufacturer in terms of ease of doing business. There are number of approvals that we have to take, particularly when we are setting up a new unit. Then a number of approvals, both at the central level. Well, at the center level, they have reduced, but at the state level, they continue to be huge number of approvals, and periodically you have to comply with a lot of requirements, which makes it difficult, particularly for an MSME player, because an MSME entrepreneur is, he wants to spend all his time in setting the business, running it viably and profitably. And if he has to spend today, what happens is almost 30 to 40% of your time you are spending on meeting the government requirements, whether they are state government requirements or central government requirements. So in a nutshell, the ease of doing business has to improve. Yes, we have made some strides, but I think we have to make very large, giant strides in that direction. The second is our financial costs. Again, as Nitinji said, let's say for component manufacturing, for a let's say $100 billion worth of investment, all you can get out in terms of output is 100 or 150, maximum $200 billion. So if you're looking at a $300 billion electronic market, to support that, you will require $150 billion worth of component manufacturing. And for $150 billion worth of component manufacturing, you require almost anywhere between $100 to $150 billion of investment in component manufacturing. So if that comes at a higher cost, then we start with a disadvantage. Even today, although the financial costs have come down a little bit, even today, compared to other electronic manufacturing countries, we are, absolutely at a disadvantage. In electronic manufacturing developed countries in Southeast Asia, the interest rates are 1 to 2% or maximum 3%, while we still have anywhere from 8 to 9 or 10%. So that is the second aspect that we have to look, particularly for MSME. The third is some of the policies that the government has come out with, whether it is the central government or the state government. Some of the policies are extremely good, but the policy deliverables are not so good. I'm sure many of us would agree that getting the reimbursement, whether it was for MSIPs, whether it was for specs, whether it is for PLI, takes forever. And you have to give so much of documentation. You have to actually engage 2 or 3 employees for every scheme that you participate in. You have to dedicate 2 or 3 employees just satisfying the PMAs like the IFCIs or the other big four when the government has had appointed them. The amount of the workload that builds on us, it is very difficult to get the deliverables from the government. So these are some of the challenges that the MSME sector in particular, but the entire electronic sector faces. If we can improve on those, I'm sure, as again Nitinji said, we'll be an unstoppable country for electronic manufacturing.
So, Mr. Kunkulyankar, if I can come to you, and expand on what you were speaking. We clearly have the intent. How do we develop this capital, patient capital? Because some of these investment in this space takes time. Also, do we have the skill set, the manpower to make sure our ambitions come true?
Yeah, so it's not only capital and the skill set, but also the resources in terms of the land, the power. Getting land is almost a challenge in 90% of the states in India. It's not very easy to get a decent land. Someone will give you a land at maybe 100, 200 kilometers. I tried evaluating all the 16 electronic manufacturing clusters. Hardly any cluster is within a radius of 100 kilometers from the port or airport. So look at hardly anything. So when we talk of export-led growth, and we believe that export-led growth is the future, we need to have export-led infrastructure also close by. So there are issues about resources. You look at the land availability is a challenge. Most of the states, you don't get land very easily or at a competitive price. Corruption in land allotments is a widely known fact. You look at availability of the power. Let's say if you don't want the government power, if you want to go for a solar, look at the cost of deployment of this renewable energy. It comes at a very high cost. It adds up to your further costing. So this is where the challenges are there, and government has to step in. The resources are to be made available in terms of the skill set in a nearby area. if you are training people 500 kilometers away from your EMC, it's of no use. People would like to stay close by. Then the question comes, can there be proper dormitory and proper housing for those industrial workers? That is also lacking in India, except few companies, very few companies. They are not provided proper housing support because the local ecosystem is not so good. The labor laws, we have apprehensions about erratic labor at times because they feel if we keep everyone together, they gang up against us. And that's a hard reality. Many people wouldn't like to speak about it, but that's the reality why people refrain from, creating a common infrastructure for them. So we need to have flexi labor laws, manufacturing-centric, growth-centric labor laws. At the same time, we need to look about labor welfare. We don't deny that, but there has to be a proper, not one-sided legal system. The rule of law, if there are issues in the labor disputes, the rule of law should exist and it should not be politically driven. Most of the states, there is too much of political intervention when it comes to the voters. Everyone is voter-centric and not growth-centric. You need to choose your voter in a very polished way. There are states where voters are pampered. Everyone in the local area, they say, no, they are my voters. Don't sack them. Don't get rid of them. You tolerate them. This won't work. If we want to go professionally, compete with the world, we need to also have a competitive labor, which is productive and disciplined. It's not only productive labor, but also a disciplined labor. That does not exist across in India. Some states, yes, some areas, yes, but the fear of, once we get into a labor issue, the redressal system is not very clear. There has to be a department of manufacturing. Today, MEIT deals with electronics manufacturing, heavy industries deals with some other manufacturing, chemical and fertilizers, they deal with pharmaceutical manufacturing. Someone else is discussing, all PLI schemes are dealt by many people. How you think all different people will have same vision? So you need to actually integrate, like how you created a department of logistics.
So Amit, let me come to you now. We see record exports when it comes to mobile phones, especially last year or so. Time to celebrate, or is there more to it?
Yeah, look, I think we've had a fantastic run on the mobile phones, and we keep hearing it. I think the way I look at it is that on the overall global share, we're probably the second largest now in terms of the phones manufacturing. The kind of runway that we have hit, I think my sense is there will be much more that we'll be able to do. If you just look at the government projections, and we're roughly around 400 million. I think we just touched upon this earlier, but likely to go up to about 1 billion unit phone sets, right? That's significant. If you look around some of the expansion, diversification of the supply chain, de-risking initiatives being done by the global brands, that's significant. So I think this is a little. My sense is that I think there is more to come, but I fundamentally believe that we will have to have high-tech electronic manufacturing in place to sustain this momentum. Otherwise, its assembly plant is, the entry barriers is not that big. Yes, of course, you need to build up a supply chain and qualify and build that piece, which is great. But the further glue would be, and a drive for further growth will be, let's say, having a display module integrated to the phones, for example, right? I think that will localize a greater value chain.
And do you think all these things about friendshoring, nearshoring, are all those things playing a part in this?
Absolutely, it is, right? Look, fundamentally, if you look at from a brand's perspective, they would like to be able to tap talent in more than 2-3 countries, right? It's like, how you see yourself, typically, and as an IT service provider, you wouldn't like to be putting your eggs in all 1 or 2 baskets, right? You would like to diversify them. I think that's really what is happening in case of India. I think there is a significant the demand in India is great, right? I mean, and therefore there is to supply to that demand. Second, I think the policy incentives which has come in is quite attractive, and that's bearing fruits. And number three, as I see it, is that the electronics per se is a strategic focus sector for the business and the political class together, and that's making difference as well. So absolutely, all of that combined.
Mr. Matwani, we've heard so much about mobile manufacturing and how it has managed to scale up. Electronic manufacturing is just not about handset production. Do you think we are giving too much of importance to mobile manufacturing at the moment?
Well, that was a good initiative to begin with, but you're absolutely right. It's not only mobile phones that electronic manufacturing is all about. There are other sectors in electronic manufacturing that can bring much better results. And as rightly Nitin ji said a little while ago, that the value add today, despite the fact that we are doing a lot of exports of mobile phones, but where is the value add? Probably at best 12 to 13%. While if we look at other sectors like IT hardware sector, LED lighting, telecommunication, solar, all these sectors, and component manufacturing by itself, all these sectors have a much higher value add opportunity, and therefore those should also be addressed, and those should be focused. Mobile phones, yes, we've done well, but there's a lot more beyond that. Let's, for example, look at India is the largest market for two-wheelers, particularly the electronic two-wheelers. We should focus on those sectors, because that can give us much higher value add, and it can be, and once we have higher value add there, what will we do? We'll be able to export more competitively, number one. Number two, we will also be able to create more jobs. When we do only mobile phones, I think the job creation is fairly low. But if you go into these other sectors, the job creation will be much higher. There is another thing that I want to point out here. India has, as Mr. Amit Bhargav also said, Nitinji also mentioned, that we have a large talent pool. But this talent pool is used very, very effectively by multinationals. They get the product designed here, get it manufactured either in China or Vietnam or elsewhere, and they sell it back to India at 100x. We should encourage local companies to do the design. We have ignored design by and large for ourselves. So we should focus on India-specific design. Yes, there are a lot of people. We have a very large workforce in designing, but they design for MNCs for their countries. We have to design for our countries and for our country. And also, when they will do that, then they will also start designing for global needs. So that's one area that we should focus on. Saying it very simply, we should look at design-led growth. We should look at India becoming a design nation. And that is, and electronic design has the greatest potential. Electronics is all pervasive. We've heard about wearables, hearables. There is a tremendous scope in sensors, IoTs. So it's way, way beyond mobile manufacturing.
Right. Mr. Kulkarni, what are the areas where when it comes to electronic manufacturing that India can focus on? What should India's electronic stand for?
I fully endorse with Amrit just said, and I really appreciate that. We need to first come with design-linked incentive scheme on a priority basis, and don't give this peanuts like 2%, 3%. Government should give at least 10 to 15% for a design-linked incentive for the early startups for next 3 to 4 years. I'll tell you the reason. Even if government invests 5 to 10,000 crores or 20,000 crores in this segment, the payback for the government will be multifold. Even government itself can see this as an investment for the nation, which will give tremendous returns over a period of next 20 years or maybe more. My point is, which are the sectors around 20 billion, which are likely to go up to almost 100 trillion sensors are being used. Gradually, by 2030, the demand for sensors globally would go to somewhere around 500 trillion plus. Look at the way automotive sector is growing. Look at the way all other sectors is going, and the technology is getting converged. Two things are happening today. Today, technology, a lot of things are getting converged. Secondly, technology is getting converged into technology. You look at the automated cars. Automated cars, you have robotics, you have storageable power technology, and you also have AI. Right? All three technologies for the first time in the history of technology have integrated together. So these integrations are going to only grow. So when this happens, India, because we are considered as a knowledge hub, the knowledge and the design skills, if they are integrated with hardware manufacturing, India would lead the world. And I assure you that India would lead the world. We need to promote electronic hardware startups in a very aggressive way. Infuse as much as money as you can put. And there are so many wealthy people across India. I'm not talking about top 100 of India or top 1,000. I'm talking to you about beyond 1,000. There are multi-millionaires or billionaires are willing to give if they are incentivized. We need to put hand in their pockets. Government has to devise a scheme which will infuse these people invest in a better way into the startups. Don't look at only top 100, top 200. They are focused on bigger jobs. Let them do that. But mid-level, small-level entrepreneurs also need to invest in other business setups. So in electronic hardware, that will change India.
Right. Last question, Mr. Madhwani, if I can come to you first. We set up the most immediate target is, getting to a $300 billion electronics industry. How feasible is that? Are we on track? And what are the areas of improvement?
Well, firstly, yes, the $300 billion target is very, very practical and definitely achievable over the next 4 years. But even if it is not, if it instead of 4 years, it takes 5 years. So what? The fact is, that's point number. Point number two, we have again to look at what we need most. The government of India has come out with this India Semiconductor Mission scheme. The total demand in India today for semiconductors is about $10 billion. In the next 4 to 5 years, it is likely to go up to 7x. So it'll be about $70 to $75 billion. If you look at the total demand of $300 billion, semiconductor in any electronic product really contributes anywhere between 25-40% semiconductors, whether active or passive, whatever. So we are investing in the right sector in semiconductors. Similarly, we are country is investing in solar, automotive electronics like the EVs and electronic two-wheelers like motorcycles and scooters. Also, we are there is huge potential in telecommunication, 5G coming in, and India's also eyeing at 6G, etc., etc. So with all these sectors, definitely $300 billion is very much achievable. If you look at it the other way, the electronic manufacturing, the electronic industry worldwide is likely to go up to $3 trillion. If we look at it from that point of view, with 18% population, and we have our fair share of at least 15%, we're looking at $450 billion. So $300 billion is a very, very reasonable target, achievable target. The entrepreneurship is here. The government schemes are here. Only thing is that, as again Nitinji rightly said, there has to be a political will, there has to be a bureaucracy will. If they align, and if there is alignment between center and state in terms of industry policies, I'm sure achieving $300 billion is not a dream, it is a reality. It can be a reality. Thank
Right. Mr. Kunkulekar, you think the target is achievable and we are on track?
It is certainly an achievable target. On semiconductors, we may get a great success maybe after 8 to 10 years, but it's a great start, though it's quite late. But yes, it's not only from the economic angle, but also from a strategic angle. Looking at the kind of safety and security of the nation is involved. It was extremely important that India has to get into semiconductor manufacturing at an it should have happened long back, maybe 20 years back or even 15 years back. But nevertheless, today this government has shown the will, and we should only drive this. If the semiconductor ecosystem matures over a period of time, but in between, if we start working over it in other products development in terms of component, the integrated value chain of electronics manufacturing can certainly be close to $300 billion in maybe next 3 to 5 years. The world economy is certainly going to grow in electronics. I'm talking about only electronics. And if you look at the areas of the world, the only promising nation which has a capability to deliver in terms of both domestic volume club with the potential for export volume is India. If that is the opportunity, what we are saying is don't do mistakes and don't be lethargic in losing those opportunities. That is what we are appealing to the state governments and other bureaucrats. They say tap it. This is the way we can make India a very robust nation. $300 billion would not only impact India, but it will also impact the geopolitical situations, economic balance of the world. 300 billion may not be a very big figure in terms of the global trade, but yes, it's going to change a lot of dynamics in the Asia Pacific. It's going to change a lot of relocation of supply chains migrating from other nations to us. And I think the multiplier effect of this, let's say for every direct employment, you would create at least 7 to 8 indirect employment by growth in services. See, the growth in services does not create growth in manufacturing, but growth in manufacturing creates a multiplier growth in services as well. And that's a very important point, because India, if you look at the declining labor force in agriculture, the substitution of employment opportunities can only happen through manufacturing. And what is the potential and which is the most promising sector? It's only electronics.
The target of 300 billion electronics industry by 2023. How feasible is that? And in that quest, how should India ensure that we just don't go about manufacturing low-end devices, but also get into product with greater sophistication?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we did touch upon this earlier. In my sense, the value chain is 3 parts, right? I think there is the end device assembly, which then goes into the customer. Then there is the high-tech components, which goes into the assembly plants for them to assemble the device, right? And then on the extreme left is the basic raw materials that are needed, right, for these components to be produced. To give you a simple example, there is glass substrate which is needed, which goes into the glass panels, which goes into the display modules, and the display modules along with the other components of the mobile phone are assembled by the mobile assembly plants, right? It is imperative that some of these components are produced in the country, right? Otherwise, the beyond a point, there is nothing much additional reasons for for the brands to take substantiative moves to come into India. I think they will try and move this and say that, oh, India is a great place. It's giving us a diversification of global supply chain. Government policies are great, but you know what? I think I can be more competitive also because my supply chains are localized now, right? And I think there is much and more beyond them it start coming into play. So one is I think that localization of the value chain is very important to kind of look at the 300 number that you were talking about, Pran. And I think the second in that I think is a sheer dominance of the smartphones. You know, we're very banking significant on the smartphones, right? So I think that phone journey would be very critical as well in the 300 the target that the government has taken. I would say that there is also a very important factor, which is to have the TV, the IT, the auto replicate the success of the smartphones, which I said. I think that's an untapped potential. I clearly see that. So I think those are really the three things that I would say, right? In terms of the localization of value chain, the consolidation of the phones, and the replication of the success story that we see in the phone by the other end devices applications.
We clearly have a long way to go where we establish the viability of the industry, scale to be globally competitive, and supply chains that are not developed piecemeal. This was a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for joining us today.
Financing has been a perennial issue for small businesses. And after that very interesting panel discussion on electronics manufacturing, we have a fireside chat with RVS Are Kumar, General Manager Commercial Banking Group, Karur Vyasa Bank, on banking the underserved MSME segment and how small businesses can be empowered for growth.
Hi, I'm Maloni Bhatt, and welcome to this special conversation at the MSME Day Conclave on the theme of building future-ready MSMEs for India at 100. Today, we have with us RVS Are Kumar. He's the General Manager, Commercial Banking Group at Karur Vyasa Bank, to talk to us on banking the underserved MSME segment, empowering small businesses for growth. We'll explore Karur Vyasa's approach to MSME lending, reaching businesses in smaller cities, challenges in providing loans, and the impact of high interest rates and the role of technology in enhancing accessibility. With that, Mr. Kumar, welcome to economictimes.com.
Good morning, Meloni. Thanks for having us.
All right, sir. My first question to you is, Karur Vyasa Bank was recognized as the runner-up for the best MSME-friendly bank and the best innovative bank by the Chamber of Indian Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. Can you tell us how your bank approaches lending to MSMEs and addresses all the unique credit demands and challenges?
That's right, Meloni. See, the bank has a 107 years old glorious history of focused MSME lender. It's traditionally known as a traders friendly bank, and a bank which is friendly to micro and small enterprises, entrepreneurs who are in the micro and small enterprise category, who are more into tier 3 and tier 4 towns in where the entrepreneurs feel comfortable to approach the bank. They feel it is their own partner. So over the years, the bank has evolved itself as a bank which is a one-stop shop for all the requirements of micro and small entrepreneurs and traders. So you will ask me, what is it that unique methodology or unique processes that the bank has evolved? See, bank is has adopted or has evolved a proprietary method of customer connect in the micro and small enterprises category, wherein the customers, see, when I interact, I come across, not only me, everyone who interacts with the customers, there are customers across 3-4 generations banking with the same bank, with Karur Vyasa Bank. That is the kind of comfort that the bank gives with the unique customer connect. And what is important is you will all appreciate that for micro and small enterprises, the timely availability of credit and adequate availability of credit, both are important. And with a process which is shorn of difficult procedures. So that is where Karur Vysya Bank stands out as a unique SME bank.
All right, and that's wonderful, because I think that is one of the segments that's proving a little hard to crack for a lot of the other banks, but you're already present there. My next question is, according to the Blink Invest MSME lending report of 2022, MSME loan disbursements have doubled in the past 2 years, mainly in smaller cities, in the cities and towns where you operate. With your experience and from your vantage, what are the improvements that can be made to the credit underwriting policies and processes to further increase this growth?
See, the dynamics of the markets are ever changing. They're so fast changing. There are disruptions happening in various segments, right, where micro and small entrepreneurs or micro or small enterprises and traders who are in the bottom of the pyramid in the entire scheme of things. So here, adopting a kind of practical approach which takes into account the ground level dynamics of the business and helping these businesses to withstand the kind of headwinds that the economy is facing requires evolving methodologies which are more tuned to the respective businesses. So that is where bank has evolved a proprietary business rule engine. We have embarked on a digital lending journey way back in 2017-18, and that has now come out so well and popular that there are many cases where the deserving customers, everything is decided within not more than an hour. The entire eligibility amount, other things. The automation is so smooth and taking into account all the requirements. The system has become fast and prompt for meeting the requirements of the entrepreneurs.
Right. Mr. Kumar, you mentioned that your approach, which is essentially a sort of a methodology that you have evolved after interaction with your customers and understanding the customer's needs at the ground level, and of course by adopting digital technologies, you're able to cater to this segment, but very often banks are cautious about lending to MSMEs, isn't it? Because the perceived risk is such, and also the regulations are quite strict. There is now, though, a growing realization that banks need to adopt and adapt to the changing needs of this sector. What challenges would you say banks still face in providing loans to MSMEs? And, would you say that there could be any policy interventions to support banks?
See, as of now, the policy framework that is available is adequate to give guidance to the people who are in the field, in this space. So what is required is a proactive approach by the players, whether it is fintechs or the banks or whoever, to adapt themselves to the ground level problems, challenges these entrepreneurs are facing, and work out solutions. See, the underlying, the most important thing that I would say, based on my experience and based on our bank's experience, is we should be seen, like Karur Vysya Bank is seen as an all-weather friend by the micro and small entrepreneurs, not a fair-weather friend. So that makes a lot of difference.
Right. All right. Despite the pause in repo rate hikes, interest rates remain high, and this impacts the ability of small businesses to borrow. How would you say these high interest rates regime have affected MSME borrowing? And, what would you say your outlook is for the next 2-3 quarters?
See, there are two things I think I mentioned earlier also in this conversation, that what matters to these small entrepreneurs, traders, and micro entrepreneurs, because of the advantages they have in rotating the capital, pricing is not as important as the adequate availability of working capital and timely availability of working capital. If you take care of these two factors, I don't think interest rates are a challenge. Okay. Given the fact that they have innate ability to rotate the funds, only when there is a problem in getting the payments realization of the receivables, that is where banks have to step in to understand and rework the working capital assessment for accommodating, where the receivables are stretched to accommodate them. That is where banks are free to evolve their own assessment methodologies.
Right.
So
So you're saying that the high interest rate regime has not impacted borrowings that you're in?
see, these segment which are in the upmarket or upper segment, which are very price sensitive, what you say is applicable. But those who are in the bottom of the pyramid, what matters to them is, since they are able to rotate the capital better, those who are able to, those activities, those businesses which are able to rotate the capital fast, they're able to manage the pricing.
All right. The expert committee on MSMEs estimated a credit gap of 25 odd lakh crore in 2019, with small businesses still recovering from the pandemic. What are the sort of impacts you see the revamped credit guarantee trust for MSMEs, the CGT MSME scheme, having on the funding landscape?
After the advent of this COVID-induced pandemic, the informal trade credit the sources have dried down, which has impacted the overall movement in the system, the movement of capital in the system. That has added to the woes of the entrepreneurs in the bottom of the pyramid. But increasing the threshold level up to 5 crores by CGT MSE is a very good initiative, and that's going to help the entrepreneurs who are in the path of growth. That is a very good initiative, and it would also mitigate the risks that the banks are also will have to handle. It's a very good move, and it also will help us the banks to minimize the credit gap.
Any tweaks that you think are needed to improve the efficacy of it?
See, the extent can be increased from 75% to 90%. That would be a better risk mitigant for the banks.
Okay. So that is your ask. What is the impact you expect co-lending with NBFCs to have on MSME funding?
See, the areas where the banking system is not able to penetrate in that segment of entrepreneurs, NBFCs are able to access those segments. So the co-lending has opened a window for the banks to reach out to this segment of MSMEs also, which is definitely helping in expanding the footprint of the banks with the help of NBFCs. So this is definitely a good move, and Karur Vysya Bank has also taken a good initiative. We are partnering with a good number of NBFCs. Mostly this segment that we are touching are the commercial equipment, the commercial vehicles and commercial equipment, construction equipment, which is the segment which is not aggressively touched by the formal channels.
Right.
So that is this co-lending is giving us a good window to cover those areas and segments.
Right. Tell us how digital banking solutions, are gaining prominence, how Karur Vysya is using technology and digital platforms to make its banking service more accessible and convenient for micro and small businesses. You touched a little bit on it right at the beginning, but if you could elaborate.
See, the bank has started on the digital journey way back in 2017-18. And when the real challenge came in the year 2020, our bank was one of the first banks to get onboarded by the National Credit Guarantee Trust Corporation for the guaranteed emergency line of credit. And ours is the only bank which has automated the requirements. At the time, many entrepreneurs in the micro and small were clueless because of the challenges. It was unknown situation for most of all the people, and especially these micro entrepreneurs. The digital lending platform has enabled our bank to see that the workflow is automated, and there are 99% of the cases, we were able to reach that emergency credit line within a half day. The process was so automated that within half day approvals used to come, whereas many big players were doing manually.
Right.
That was the advantage KVB had.
Okay.
These are some of these. These are some of the reasons why the bank has, as you at the introductory remark you said about bank is recognized for its MSME friendly approach. So the concluding line is that Karur Vysya Bank is known as an all-weather friend to the entrepreneurs, not a fair-weather friend.
All right, sir. And, we wish you all success in continuing to be the all-weather friend. Thank you so very much for speaking to us here at theeconomictimes.com.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
India clocked record exports last year and hopes to replicate that feat. There are, however, significant challenges, and India would need a plan in place to see exports grow. Our next panel discussion on the strategies needed by India to script its own export-led growth strategy looks at this issue with greater depth.
Rising trade, favorable geopolitical conditions, and a more conducive domestic policy has meant many now think it is possible for India to be a major exporting country. But on the other hand, global trade and globalization itself is changing. Many say we are in the midst of deglobalization or even deglobalization. In this changing nature of trade, can India script its own export-led growth strategy? To talk on the subject, we have with us today Nisha Taneja, Professor, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, Independent Trade Expert Manashwi Srivastava, Anil Bharadwaj, Secretary General, the Federation of Indian Micro and Small Medium Enterprises, and Dr. Ajay Sahai, Director General and CEO, Federation of Indian Export Organizations. Welcome everyone, and good to have you with all us today.
Thank you. Our pleasure to be here.
Thank
Great.
you.
So, Dr. Taneja, let me come to you first. India did well in exports last year. How does it look like this year?
Sorry. So let's start with the target of $2 trillion exports that we want to achieve. And against that backdrop, how is it that we fared really in the last year compared to the previous year? So, well, if you look at both goods and services exports, the increase was 14%. And that seems pretty good. It seems all right. But if we break it down into goods and services, then what we find is that goods exports actually increased by 6% and services exports increased by 27%. So clearly the increase is largely due to the service exports rather than the goods exports. But we need to unbundle this further. So let's take goods first. Now, in the goods sector, what we find is that basically the increase was largely because of two items. Petroleum products and electrical equipment. And so basically petroleum exports increased by 45% and electrical equipment increased by 42%. And that seems quite significant. But there is a basic difference in these two items, which is that petroleum exports, the gain was largely due to the Ukraine war. And well, of course, we got our geopolitical strategy right, and we had access to discounted petroleum, raw petroleum, and we were able to expand exports. But then we need to be mindful that this was not really because of any efficiency gains or because of gains in improved competitiveness. So this was, yes, we played the geopolitical game right, and we gained from it. But if we look at electrical equipment, then the story is very different. This was largely because of our exports in smartphones. And here again, maybe one can ascribe it largely to the PLI scheme. So, so that's also what we need to keep in mind. But more importantly, if we exclude these two items where we saw substantial gains, then what we find is that exports actually declined by 3.3%. And that is worrying. And so we need to really look at what's going on and where is it that we have actually lost out and why. So sectors where we saw the largest decline was basically iron and steel and also in cotton. And iron and steel exports fell by 42% and cotton declined by 48%. Of course, iron and steel exports fell because of the imposition of a ban on exports for about 6 months. And cotton because there was a drastic fall in production. In fact, our exports in cotton were at a 19-year low. I mean, so that's very, very significant. But if we look at other labor-intensive products like ready-made garments or leather, their shares have remained stagnant. But also what we see is, and this is something that I like to talk about, which is pharmaceuticals. It has a lot of promise. It's a sunrise sector, but sadly, the share of pharmaceuticals is actually declining. And so we really need to see what's going on and why this is happening, because for labor-intensive exports, for a long time now, we've seen that they are stagnant. But this is something that in the last 2 or 3 years, we are seeing a new trend of decline. There are other issues with our exports. For instance, we continue to have a highly concentrated product basket and a highly concentrated market ratio. Now, again, it's just these two items, which is petroleum and gems and jewelry, which accounted for 31% this year. And this concentration has actually gone up, because last year these two items accounted for 26%, and this year it's accounting for 31%. So there's been an increase in concentration. And if you look at our export basket in terms of countries, then the countries have remained the same. It's basically the US, UAE, Bangladesh, and China. So these are really the large markets, and they've remained the same. Now, on service exports, what we find is that more or less, I think what we've seen now for many years is that computer and information services continues to be the largest sector. And this year it accounted for 46%, and it grew at 21%. But if we look at other business services, here the increase has been a lot more. Even though it accounts for only 24%, the growth was 38%. But the surprise story was really in travel services, where we saw an increase of 193%, and it basically increased by almost 3 times. And for years we've been wanting to see exports of tourism, and why is the tourism sector not doing well, and suddenly we see this. But let's hope that this is not a one-time gain, and that we work towards sustaining tourism exports in the future as well. But this certainly is a bright spot. But services that have that need more attention is e-commerce exports. They continue to account for a very small proportion. So we need to look at that more carefully, and the regulatory regime, the business environment, the entire ecosystem for it needs to be looked into. So,
Right. Manasvi, if I can come to you. Dr. Taneja has given us quite a lot of numbers. Do you think India would be able to outperform last year's export numbers? How much is riding on services export?
Well, I'd say Nisha put it very well, that services has been the sunny story of exports, because the increase has been whopping compared to the goods. And this is not just a story of 1 year. If I look at, say, one full decade or maybe 20 years back in time, then the share of services in the total export basket of India has changed to the extent that I think it was about 67-33, 67% goods and 33% services in 2011-12. That is about 10 years back. And if we look at today, it is, I believe, 54-46 or something like that, 52-48. So the services have been closing the gap with merchandise exports. So there's a lot riding on them. Unless and until we do very well in services, it'll be very difficult for us to outgrow last year's numbers. Of course, the gains from geopolitics have been there, and we don't know when the situation would change. As and when it changes, obviously merchandise exports numbers would not look as rosy as as the overall picture today might look. It's not really rosy, as we just discussed. Now, one thing which is, I believe, important is to diversify the basket of services that India has been depending upon. Tourism is a sunshine sector, absolutely. But I would draw caution on the numbers that Nisha just mentioned, an increase of 190%. That is obviously on the base of a pre-pandemic year. People had given up traveling. So that increase might look huge, but in effect, let's look at the past 3 years numbers and a compounded annual growth rate. It's good. Obviously, it's not out of this world as a number of 190 would suggest. This is definitely an area, along with certain other services, which we need to encourage, both from the point of view of our export numbers, as well as from the point of view of exports making a difference to the people, employment, and the economy. Because let's realize that the IT services, which have been, of course, the bigger part of our exports of services basket, they employ about how much? About 5 million people. And that's an estimate. And we have a workforce of about 900 million people in this country. So the services sector needs to do well, not just for exports, but also for employing more and more people, given the fact that we do not see the traction that we wanted to see in manufacturing. So kind of a long-winded answer to what you asked. But in short, yes, services would need to cover the gap. I would be very cautious in saying that, yes, we will exceed last year's numbers.
Cautious. Mr. Bhardwaj, how are Indian MSME exporters doing when it comes to global trade at the moment? What are the headwinds that you see?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, this is a fact that export scenario is becoming increasingly challenging for Indian exporters. First and foremost, the declining demand in our major market, whether it is Europe or US, is a big issue. As you know, the global GDP growth in 23 is projected to be just 2.7%. And in OECD, it is actually going to be less than 40% of this number, approximately 1.8%. That is what the numbers have been given by the OECD. So the real household disposable incomes were declined in 22, though projected to improve up to 10% in several rich countries. So this has a direct bearing on our demand elastic exports, such as textile and garments, gems and jewelry, leather, handicrafts. Then the second set of challenge that is coming up is the new entry barriers for our exports. For example, the EU's proposed legislation on a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And recently, yesterday we saw in the news reports, the UK's new developing countries trading scheme, DCTS, which has come into force from Monday. And Indian exports will no longer would be able to benefit from the GSP regime. And it would impact approximately goods for approximately $1 billion. And then Russia-Ukraine war, etc., have already created conditions like, for large number of engineering products because of the dual use restrictions as well as payment-related restrictions in the Middle East. So, I mean, there are challenges that have increased. And I don't think that many of these challenges are going to become less in the foreseeable future.
Right. Dr. Sai, how do you see Indian exports panning out this year? Merchandise exports are not doing all that well. And Mr. Bhardwaj also talked about non-tariff barriers. How do you see things panning out for Indian exports?
Much will depend on what would be the prices of the commodities, because we were just evaluating the export number for the month of May, which shows a decline of around 10% in India's exports. But roughly 6.3% was contributed by petroleum only, because the crude prices, which were around $104 billion in May 2022, has come down to around $72 billion. So these kinds of drop in the prices may have an impact on the value. That's why we personally feel that a quantitative-wise analysis would be a better parameter. Otherwise, changing in the profile and product commodity value, we can have this kind of scenario. But as of now, we are expecting that our goods exports should move from around $447 billion to close to $500 billion. And in services, we are looking into whether we will be able to push it to around $390 to $400 billion. And I think panelists have rightly said that now we are facing little pressure on the services. If you look into the recent data, the services has just given a growth of around 0.2%. So that's a challenge. And I personally feel that unless new businesses are formed, we will have challenges in IT exports also. Most of the IT exports, if it's just a kind of incremental improvement, will not give much of the business to the services. So unless the new businesses are formed globally, new companies are floated, even Indian IT and IT-enabled services will face the challenge. I think a good thing for India is that now we are targeting to the segment where major global trade is happening. Today, technology-driven sector, whether it's electronics, machinery, electrical parts and equipment, they are contributing to roughly 1/3 of the global import of around whopping size of around $7 trillion. Unfortunately, in this segment, our share is even not 0.8%. But the good thing is that PLI scheme is contributing, and they are now focusing on all the three segments. We have seen result in the case of electronics sector and particularly in the mobile. In fact, it is very heartening that in the month of March, we were having a kind of trade surplus in mobile sector where the mobile export exceeded the mobile imports. The way Apple is now focusing on India, we are pretty sure that probably this year, instead of $5 billion, we may end up with an export of $10 to $12 billion. So we will do very well in that. We are hoping that even in the rest of the electronics product, particularly in the tablet and TV segment, we will do very well. But I think for a country like India, it is extremely important that we manage a kind of a twin policy where we push the services, sunrise sectors of export. At the same time, we have to facilitate our labor-intensive export. They may not be that much important for the export number, extremely important for generating jobs into the country. We also feel that since we will having much effective FTAs, which will be operational soon, or those who have been signed will be exploited much more than that, will also provide some little cushion to Indian exports. So despite these challenges, we are, as of now, we are looking into around 490 to $500 billion of merchandise exports. But I'm keeping my finger crossed because much will depend how the global commodity price behave in next 7 to 8 months time.
So 490 to 500 is what Dr. Sahai is looking at. Dr. Tanisha, if you can come to, countries like South Korea, China, Taiwan, they've all used exports as a tool for economic growth. However, is that kind of a model, an export-led growth model, viable in today's world?
Well, I think today the situation is quite different. At the time that we were talking about export-led growth paradigm, it actually replaced the import substitution industrialization paradigm. And that was largely driven by manufacturing, where we were talking about scale economies and we were talking about increased competitiveness, knowledge spillovers, and services was nowhere on the horizon. So in the last 15 years, one significant change that we've seen is that the same developing countries that were talking about export-led growth strategy have actually done very well on the services front, and India is again one of the leading countries that have contributed to this trend. But what I would say is that what we need to do is to have a balanced approach. So we do need an export strategy. My answer would be yes, maybe not an export-led strategy, but definitely we need an export strategy. And this has to be, in tandem with policies that would work towards increasing domestic demand. So it needs to be on both fronts, and we need to look at both of them simultaneously. So in fact, it was, I think, as far back as 2013 that UNCTAD actually spoke about or wrote about this balanced approach. And since then, I think countries have, kind of had this kind of an approach towards growth. But I think in more recent times, more has changed, because what we are seeing is that the whole supply chain concept has changed. And what we're looking at is, basically, a lot of our pandemics and the geopolitical tensions, trade wars. It's created a lot of uncertainty, and now resilience is really the buzzword. So there is a heightened emphasis on resilience and security. So we're talking about different kinds of securities here. We're talking about data security. We are talking about technology security. We are talking about actual threats. So, and we're also living now in a polarized world where we can be talking about, say, on the one hand, liberal democracies, and on the other hand, we're talking about authoritarian countries. So between these two groups, and if you're going to be in a situation where there might be trade sanctions, we might be in a situation where we might have to actually take sides, and that's not easy. This time we managed and navigated it quite well, but in the future it's uncertain, and we also don't know what kind of a challenge we might face. So this is a new challenge today. So how do we prepare ourselves? Even in terms of, we need to be talking about a different kind of risk management. do we actually have the human skill to deal with these things? To, what kind of firm strategies should be put in place to deal with these kind of situations? And what is the extent to which we can actually do scenario building? What are the different parameters that we would need to take into account to do this kind of scenario building? So, I think that's definitely something that is going to be a challenge. I think we also talked about the FTAs, and that the trade sees that as an opportunity. I think what's happened is that if we look at export growth in the last 10 years, 11 years, for FTA countries and FTA partner countries and non-FTA partners, for exports, the growth rate has been the same. It's been 5%. And if we look at imports in the same period, then for FTA countries, the imports increase has been 8%, and for non-FTA, it's been 5%. So clearly what's happened is that we really need an export strategy, because irrespective of whether we have an FTA or not, our growth rate doesn't seem to vary. And so any country that we look at, we need to look at market access issues more carefully. Like, how do we enter into these into markets? It's really not about tariffs anymore. So how do we meet standards? Now we are talking about environmental standards, product standards. All these are getting more and more rigorous, and newer forms of compliances are coming into being, that was just mentioned. So that's the kind of preparation that we need to do to be able to enter the export markets.
Right. Manasvi, this is the World Bank in a recent analysis said that nearly all economic forces that powered progress and prosperity over the last 3 decades are fading. The age of globalization, many say it's over, and while others say it is evolving. We have new realities. Where does India place at the moment, and how should we respond?
Well, I would say definitely the reality has changed. I would not say there is deglobalization. I would tilt more in favor of reglobalization. We've all talked about and read about friendshoring. That is one advantage that India needs to take. And along with friendshoring, I think it gives us an opportunity to distinguish ourselves, as Nisha had said. When countries choose between doing business in an authoritarian regime versus a regime which has democratically elected institutions. But at the same time, India needs to present a picture that, yes, we have democratically elected institutions, which also function on rule of law, giving predictability for businesses. You can have democracy, but if it's a democracy in which institutions are not able to provide certainty to business or policy certainty to business, then despite friendshoring, we may not see much capital flowing into India. And that capital flowing into India would sooner or later translate into exports if it is leveraged properly. So one thing is that despite what World Bank has been saying that forces of globalization are fading, or the catalysts for economic growth are fading, I see new things which are coming on the horizon, which were not there earlier. For example, there are huge advances in biotech. You talk about gene editing, CRISPR technologies, and so many other new technologies which are going to completely revolutionize the world of biotech and pharma. So that is one opportunity that we need to leverage. Then there are opportunities of AI and technology consulting. We talked about services growth. Rather than just being tied to the run-of-the-mill IT and ITS services, we have an opportunity to get into technology consulting, management consulting, and providing various other services which we are in a position to provide with our educated workforce. So I would say India is still in a position to leverage the changes that are happening in the world. Despite the fading away of the earlier forces, there are new forces on the horizon which are going to give a fillip to economic growth in a different way, in a different direction.
Right. Ms. Bharadwaj, what are the enabling factors that you think MSMEs need to be globally competitive? And are our policies tuned to help them?
See, I think an enabling environment that helps firms acquire economy of scale is extremely important. And there are several things that need to be put right to achieve that. From ensuring competitive functioning of factor markets, whether it's finance or land or labor. Raw material prices, for example, have been particularly difficult thing that MSMEs had to deal with, because whether it is steel or copper, aluminium, plastic raw materials, all have been rather artificially managed in India. I mean, they are very high if you compare it from the international market, and that has a bearing on our competitiveness, particularly in terms of exports. Then access to technology. See, one of the major issues that Indian MSMEs face is that in a very large number of product categories, we are at least a decade behind in the technology, the level of technology. And the prime reason is that for 40, 50 years, there has been a policy in place, which used to be called policy of reservation. And approximately 1/3 of India's MSME tariff lines, approximately 3,000 tariff lines, they have been under reservation. And these are the product categories where most of the MSMEs are still working in suboptimal space. And what should I say? The technology gap between the international competitors and ours, particularly China, South Korea, Taiwan, is very great. And maybe it's a lot of catching up to do. Good thing is that India is trying now through PLI schemes. Also, it's a step in right direction, and that would help bring investments as well as joint ventures are happening. It is heartening that at least 1/4 of the PLI beneficiaries are MSMEs, from pharma to electronics, food processing, auto components, chemicals, etc. So I think that with passage of time, we would be able to acquire the economies of scale, and from largely a micro and small dominated segment, we would have enough number of medium enterprises that can withstand the vagaries of international trade.
Right, Dr. Sahai, we have a new trade policy, and then we have other schemes in place which want to provide fillip to exports. Are these policies enough, and do we have the means, vision, and the strategies in place to ensure a year-on-year growth now? What more do you think can be done?
In fact, policy in the current scenario, they play a little limited role because there are other factors also into place. But the good thing is that now policy is also realizing that we have to explore into new areas. So if you look into the foreign trade policy, they are looking into the potential of e-commerce, and government is looking into how in next 7 years or so we can take the e-commerce export, which is currently around $25 billion to $250 to $300 billion. We are looking into ISCOMET items exports, where we presently are exporting just $5 billion to take it to $50 billion. We are looking into the potential of merchanting trade, though of course it will only bring the net realization to the country. But when you are into global scenario, you have to be part of the merchanting trade also. The policy is more focusing on procedural simplification and digitization. They have looked into reducing, compressing the time limit for various kinds of authorization and approval. They have rationalized the fee structure, particularly from MSME. Looking into the global scenario, they have rationalized the status holders scheme also. They are now using district as an export hub, because after all, the production is captured at the district level. And if you can look into what are the supply side gaps at the district level, and you provide addressal of that, you may be providing little comfort to MSMEs also who are in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So the new foreign trade policy is addressing all those issues. And from that perspective, I feel that the policy is providing the long-term roadmap also for export, because they have chosen these sectors very carefully. One of good thing of the policy is that now policy is realizing that export has to be an inclusive activity. Earlier, if you look into the scenario, it was sole responsibility of the central government. Then they moved to the state, and now they are talking about the district. So this is something which will be extremely beneficial for Indian economy. But at the same time, I think we have to look into what are the factors which are still making exports or manufacturing little uncompetitive. And of course, logistics is going to play a pivotal role into that. To address the logistics cost, on the one hand, we are seeing all around improvement in infrastructure. We are seeing that government is aiming to reduce the logistics cost significantly, but that is something which will provide much cushion to that. The good thing is that after a little hike in the interest rate, they are now settling down, and we are hoping that if the inflation is under control, probably the central bank will bring down the interest rates also, which will another competitive factor for the export sector. So overall, I think to the extent whatever is expected from the government, that has been done. But still, I personally feel that we have to bring our focus on marketing. It's extremely important that the Indian goods are showcased. Some of our MSMEs are having best of the product that the world is not at all aware. So if we put little focus on marketing, the point is that when the global conditions are not conducive, SMEs are reluctant to participate because immediately they are not gaining an order. But it is very important that you are visible in the market so that when the global condition improves, buyer recognizes your product and buyer puts order on you. So that's why where we feel that the government needs to provide little more support to the marketing segment. For a country like India, we're looking into an export of $500 billion. The total marketing support is to the extent of 200 crores, which is extremely minuscule. That's why we feel that if some cushion can be provided on the marketing front, particularly for the MSMEs, it will help a lot. I will just address the issue of FTAs, and I entirely agree that FTA have not yielded a result in the past, probably because of the fact that we signed FTA with the countries who are very strong in manufacturing, be it the ASEAN countries, South Korea, or Japan. We are seeing now revisiting of the FTA strategy. We are now focusing on FTA with the countries who are a major export destination, and they are the complementary economies. And let me just put the figure, for example, if you're looking into India, UAE, SIPA, in the last 10 months from May to March 2023, while my overall export growth was around 3.1%, my export to UAE has gone by 8.5%. So I think if we are revisiting the strategy and focusing on the country, we will have a scenario where our exports will outpace imports. And that's something where the government is looking into that. UK will be another country where we are going to sign this kind of agreement. Probably Canada, Israel will also be on our radar by the end of the year. And then we can move to some of the regional agreement, including GCC and EU. So to the extent possible, government is providing the support. I'm pretty sure that as the global conditions improve, and our now view is that probably from the third quarter, we will see better result for exports, because globally also the interest rates are softening and the financial liquidity will be more. So once that happens, there will be more orders flowing into that. The order book position is still moderate for the Indian exports. It's not that orders have dried up even for the Europe. The volumes of the orders have come down. So once the sentiments improve, probably the volumes will also be restored. And that's why, as of now, we are quite hopeful that we'll be touching around $500 billion in merchandise sector.
And Dr. Sai, you're not worried about all the non-tariff barriers we see from the carbon tax?
No, in fact, I think we have to live with those kinds of situations, because if you are talking about the carbon tax, these are something which is in the offing. If these countries impose these kinds of carbon pricing in their country, they have to put that on imports also. All that can be discussed with these countries to have a little more time frame, probably some kind of exemptions for the MSMEs. But the good thing is that in the first category where they are looking into the product, these are the products which are manufactured by large steel, be it fertilizer, be it steel, be it chemicals. So we are not much concerned, but this is, I think, something where we have to be proactive into that. Carbon tax is one part of that. Greater worry will be on the ESG, but there is no point in just opposing that. I agree where we can buy some time, equip our industry, provide them finances to be ready for that. But this is something where you have to face the bull by the horn. There is no point in escaping that.
Right. Dr. Sanil, we mentioned about, friendshoring, nearshoring. Do you think India has benefited? I know the time span is short. And do you think, continuing with your FTA, statements, do you think the ones that we are signing now, or the ones that we signed with Australia, do you think they will yield better results?
Yeah, on friendshoring, it is so perceptible today that the world is looking at India. So if we don't use this opportunity, we will really regret it later. For instance, the Australians, we've just signed the FTA. They are so keen on diversifying their import basket because they don't want to rely too much on China. And they're looking for ways to diversify. Earlier, it was only at the government level, where it's the governments that are looking at diversification. But what is now very perceptible is that it has now percolated to the businesses. And it is now the businesses who want to diversify. And I think once that happens, we'll begin to see a change. But the point is that, is this the most efficient, cost-efficient way? Maybe we are incurring higher costs because we are not going to the most efficient partner. It's being driven by something else. So there is a cost that businesses are paying. So in the long run, I think we would need to work towards improving our efficiency and improving our competitiveness. So it all boils down to how can we make ourselves better and how can we equip ourselves better. And here, I think when we're talking about an export strategy, we need to be talking about preparedness measures. How prepared are we? Have we dealt with all the ailments that have continued from the past? We now have new ailments and new challenges. How do we prepare ourselves for the new ones, and how do we address the existing ones? So, for instance, some significant changes have happened in terms of logistics. It's been mentioned. These are really really good steps that have been taken to reduce transaction costs. And another very significant change that's happened is that India brings out a time release study, which is in line with the requirement of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. But the Trade Facilitation Agreement actually requires members to only report import release times. But India has gone a step ahead, and now we've started reporting export release times. And that's very significant. And we've actually broken it up into two parts: the regulatory part, which is basically customs, and the physical part, which is the logistic part. And now the recent numbers are actually showing that on the regulatory part, we've met all the targets that we had set. But on the logistic part, we are still falling way behind. And especially for seaports, we've only met 0.7% of the target. And it's the logistic part which actually accounts for almost 89% of the total cost that is incurred in the time release study. So I think once we start measuring, we'll begin addressing it also, because then we'll know the sources of where the time spent is more. So that's one. In terms of, again, in terms of preparedness, we're talking about the district export hub, and that's really the mantra right now. It's a great initiative because we're connecting all the export items in all the districts to a common platform. But I think it stops at that. What happens after that? We've made the platform, we connect all the exporters to the platform, but what next? So we need to there is a lot of handholding that needs to be done for all these exporters. Do they know which market their product is going to? Do they know what the requirements of that product are, the requirements of that market are? So again, we need to prepare all these exporters at the district level on how to navigate through this entire regulatory process. And now we're talking about new standards, the CBAM, and where we need to prepare all our firms, both large and small and medium. So there is a lot of work that we need to do. So I'm actually not so concerned about a shrinking world market, because if we get some of these, what is it that we can do, right? We can't control the demand side, but what is it that we can do on the supply side? There's a lot that still can be done. And I think that's where we need to put our effort.
Honestly, on the role of, WTO, how do you see that impacting India? Now, there have been certain things in the past where, which has gone against India, as, India tries to assert itself more in the global scene. How do you see countries reacting?
Well, I would say that we've been able to play a decent game out there. We had a WTO panel report against our export schemes, which came out in 2019. According to which almost all of our export schemes were held to be ultra vires of WTO rules. However, given the fortuitous circumstances that the WTO panel itself is not very functional, the appellate panel, therefore, things lie in limbo. And so that has worked to our advantage. We did not really need to do much to our export schemes, though we've still been trying to tinker with them and we've been trying to make them WTO compliant, because sooner or later, the situation will hit us, and it's likely that the appellate panel at some stage becomes functional, or if it doesn't become functional, out of sheer frustration, somebody who's filed a case against us begins to, think of retaliation. Though I would think that again to be less likely, because due to the current geopolitical circumstances, that particular case of the export incentives being illegal also was filed by the US. And we seem to be on the right side of the US in the friend-shoring scenario. So since we seem to be good buddies with them, I would not expect much of this to go out of control. But from a long and medium-term perspective, we definitely need to, plan our export schemes and our regulatory mechanisms so that we do not incur such action. As you know, that another recent action was on the goods which are covered under ITA. And I believe we would all recall that India had imposed tariffs on mobile phone components and certain other electronic goods, which were supposed to be on zero duty as per commitments under ITA. And those commitments become binding under the WTO concessions that we offer, and that's how they acquire some legal sanctity, which becomes justiciable in the WTO legal system. We lost that case, and I do remember even talking to some regulators who, at some point in time, were conscious of the fact that we could be violating, these provisions, but they were willing to take the risk. I think those risks could become costlier in the medium to long term. I don't see an immediate threat from them, because, as I said, the geopolitical situation does seem to favor us, and also the fact that we are a democratic country and not an authoritarian regime. Democracies are likely to begin to trade more and more amongst each other. So EU and US and Japan and a few other countries, probably we should be on the right side. So less of a concern from WTO in the short term, but we would need to address that concern by aligning our policy to compliance with WTO rules in the medium to long term.
Right. So Bharadwaj, do SMEs still consider exports as overtly complicated and risky? Also, taking forward the FTA discussion, do you think trade negotiations, give small business exporters a voice in, giving some practical advice to the government?
I've seen most MSMEs do consider exports as risky. As you know, that almost 95% of MSMEs are just micro enterprises, and they really work at really such a small scale that it becomes extremely difficult for them to enter into exports, because one needs a scale and level of expertise to handle the risks of international trade. Not only they have to deal with regulatory compliance of importing country, but also have to brace with the risk of payment, high cost of servicing the client, because you have to go there and also serve the client. But one thing that is changing now is with the help of e-commerce. So you already have the ODOP, one district, one product scheme. You have district hubs also that are coming up. Exports are increasingly getting involved. And suddenly you have these e-commerce platforms that can bridge very small companies, or they provide those capabilities to a very small company to handle the vagaries of international trade, be it of payments, be it of returns, be it of supplying, that is handling the logistics, etc. And I certainly feel, recently we conducted a study in FISME on e-commerce, and we found that it is certainly possible that within a span of approximately 5 years, we see that India's exports through e-commerce could reach to approximately $300 billion or so. So I think that's the good part. That will provide the micro enterprises ability to participate in international trade. On WTO's agreement, particularly the trade facilitation agreement, although in India also there is a committee that is being set up, that has been set up, because every country is required to set up a facilitation committee, and increasingly all the notifications related to non-tariff barriers are studied and also analyzed by experts. We are also part of that committee. So currently we are much more aware than what was the situation in past, that what is coming, from which country, what are the, you can say, implications of that. Increasingly, what is being done is that whatever notifications are coming up through the WTO repository, so they are analyzed in either amber or green or red lights, and we know that which one is going to be very important and how much cost it would incur on or it would impose on MSMEs. And usually there is a time also that one could prepare. So there I agree with DG FIO that I mean, you can't run away with that, or we have to deal with them. But increasingly through WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement and government's initiatives, MSMEs are much more aware. So far as participation in trade negotiations, I think we work very closely with Ministry of MSME and Department of Commerce, with the negotiating teams also. And we run out all kind of scenarios that what kind of impact would there be if import duties are, you can say, I mean, whether zero duty could be proposed or whether certain amount of duty is required, whether certain product categories would go into early harvesting scheme, or we could straight away offer them at 0 rate of duty. So, I mean, MSMEs are part of that discussions and negotiation process.
Right. So we are running out of time. So last question to everyone, starting with Dr. Sahai, given the new realities, what should the ideal export strategy for India be in terms of, say, products, countries, geographies that we look at?
In fact, I think we should look into where the global trade is happening. And again, I will bring the issue, people are talking about diversification. But if the top 40 countries account for 90% of the global trade, you have to choose your market very carefully. It makes a lot of rhetoric that you go to Africa, but if the entire business in Africa, which is available to is $5 billion, I would like to put the same kind of energy in the US market where can I get $25 billion of business. So I think it's good that we look into diversification of product and the market. But for me, I think the focus should come on the value addition. If we are going for the value addition in the product, that makes a lot of sense. Your per unit realization goes up, you create more jobs into the country, there is less pressure on the logistics, your logistics cost comes down, which makes you more competitive. That's why I will again reiterate that for a country like India, your strategy has to be a kind of twin strategy, focusing on the new products which are emerging on the scene, trying to give a push to their export, because their export is equally important in the sense that to that extent, you can also regulate and restrict the imports, because that is some of the major chunk of import which is happening into the country. At the same time, we have to look into what ways can be done to push our export of labor-intensive sectors in many of the segments. We are having huge competition from some of our neighbors also. We know that we may have the duty disadvantage, but to a large extent, probably the new FTAs which are being signed will definitely provide a level playing field to them. So for me, I think we can't just put focus on the sunrise sector. For us, the employment intensive sectors are extremely important, and therefore equal focus has to be a part of our strategy.
Right. Dr. Sai talks about the twin strategy. Mr. Bharadwaj, what are your views? What should our strategy look like?
No, I agree with him. I mean, the emphasis on diversification should be tempered with the potential that a particular market offers. And secondly, for MSMEs, it is also important that what is the cost of serving a market. I mean, it's good to say that, Latin America is coming up and it's very good to go there, but look at the cost of serving the market. So, I mean, it's good that, MSMEs continue to focus markets nearby or where there is a greater chance for their products and services to be accepted. Secondly, I think what is more important is that in the new FTAs that India is signing, particularly in UAE, with the UAE and Australia and UK and EU also coming up later. I mean, these are the FTAs where Indian MSMEs stand to benefit much more than the earlier FTAs. And the reason is very clear that, I mean, here our products are, I mean, especially MSME dominated sector, whether it is textile and garments, whether it is gems and jewelry, leather products, handicrafts, and auto components or light engineering products. I mean, these are the product categories where we see a lot of penetration possible with the help of these FTAs. One particular issue with the Middle East is with regards to payments. I think we have to find a way to take full advantage of it, especially while dealing with countries like Iran. I mean, we have a lot of untapped potential in Iran, and Indian products are still going, but I mean, they are going through lots of left and right routes, not straight. And we have to find a way out so that, you know, the bilateral trade between countries where restrictions are imposed due to geopolitical situation, I think they are addressed.
Right. Dr. Tanaka, what are your views?
Yeah, I think the kind of export strategy that we need will have to be multi-pronged, in the sense that we can't have a one-size-fits-all, because we need to look at it, you know, in terms of whether it's a consumer good or a raw material good or capital good or an intermediate good. That's one kind of classification. Or we could look at it in terms of skill and technology. You know, is it labor intensive? Is it capital intensive? What skill, medium skill, you know, highly skilled? Or we could look at it in terms of small and large. Anil just mentioned how that could be dealt with. Or we could look at it from a rural or urban point of view, where our district export hubs come into the picture. Or we need to also look at the gender side of it, which means that how are women coming into trade? If we're thinking about a $2 trillion economy, trade, then are we looking at how we could include women into this equation? Because you know, they're there at all levels of the value chain, and including as entrepreneurs. So how could we increase their participation in this entire chain, and as their participation as entrepreneurs? So the strategies would have to take into account all of these, and of course, looking at the product and the market potential aspects together. That, of course, is absolutely imperative. But then our ultimate objective has to be how we can improve the competitiveness, which means that we improve the enabling environment. And how do we equip our firms to deal with challenges, not only those that are already existing, but the new challenges that are likely to come up in the near future.
Right. Manasvi, I will let you have the last word. Your views.
Thank you, Pran. So I would not add much to the strategy bit. Everybody has said enough, which I believe is puts forth a cohesive kind of a strategic path that can be suggested. I would just add one thing, which I've held very dear to my heart, which is about how do we make IP creation, a cornerstone of our exports. And that is that I say because we've got a good set of educated manpower. However, we very often seem to lose out on putting that to work, especially when multinationals would want to put a research and development center somewhere. Then there are all various kinds of regulatory issues and taxation issues which come in between, and there is a fair amount of unpredictability which happens. So that policy certainty, if it is brought in, then we'll see that IP creation can drive our export of services much higher. We seem to be doing okay on that, but we could be doing much better on that. So that's one. The second is, I would say, more tactics than strategy, because as I said, everybody else has expounded on strategy well enough. Amongst the tactics that we need to do in the immediate term is, on the side of certainty, certain things would need to be set right. For example, there was a scheme called Manufacturing and Other Operations in a Warehouse, which was announced a few years back, and it was tom-tommed, and it was heavily promulgated and propagated through Invest India and the departments that brought it out. However, over a period of time, that scheme has been whittled down. And I'm saying this because, in my consulting career, I also was trying to sell that scheme, almost being a partner of the government of India, almost. I'm not saying that I'm a part of the government of India as of now, but, taking a cue from the direction that the government was driving in, we sold it to a lot of people. But we saw over a period of time, the advantages were whittled down. For example, the ROTTEP benefits were not available to those who are manufacturing and other operations in a warehouse availers. Similarly, certain other benefits have been taken away. And most recently, I believe the IGST exemption on goods that are imported for manufacturing and other operations in a warehouse have been done away with. So, what happens is that this creates an uncertainty for those who want to put in enough money in India to manufacture and to make it as an export base for regional or global fulfillment. So that is something that needs to change. And very specifically for one particular scheme, which I've given an example, but there would be other examples as well. Secondly, for the services sector, I do not really understand why the government is very keen to do away with the benefits under the SEIS scheme. For example, MEIS scheme, I understand it is under challenge because it has been held to be ultra vires of GATT. But the subsidies and countervailing agreement case that India lost, it pertains to GATT. It does not pertain to GATS. And therefore, SEIS as a scheme is not really hit by those restrictions. When it will be hit, then we'll see. But for such time that it is not under challenge, there should not be any hang up in giving incentives to the services sector, which has served us so well, and maybe encouraging and diversifying our basket of services that we can export to the rest of the world. So these are some of the tactical things, and the overarching theme that I would mention is policy certainty and tactics certainty on behalf of the government of India.
Right. I think that's a good place to end our discussion. Global trade certainly is dynamic and fluid, and we live in interesting times, which means we'll all have to be on our toes to benefit. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is the future of payments in India? Kilan Haria, SVP and Head of Payments Product, Razorpay, in the next fireside chat talks about how MSMEs will fuel India's next payments revolution.
Hi, I'm Aloni Bhatt. Welcome to this special conversation at the ET MSME Day Conclave. Our theme is building future-ready MSMEs for India at 100. In today's digital era, the landscape of business and commerce is rapidly evolving. Micro, small, and medium enterprises play a vital role in India's economy, contributing significantly to employment generation, innovation, and overall economic growth. And MSMEs are adopting many digitalization processes to scale and grow, like digital inventory management, online marketing and advertising, cloud computing. Today, we will focus on how digital payment systems are shaping the future of MSME growth. And I'm very happy to welcome my guest today, Kilan Haria. He's the SVP Product, Razorpay. Kilan, welcome to economictimes.com.
Thank you, Miloni.
All right. Kilan, to begin with, how does Razorpay prioritize MSMEs and what are the steps that you are taking to support their success?
For us, we have a strong belief that MSMEs are the future of the country, and therefore the future of payments and fintech, the industry that we operate in. From our early days, we've always had the belief and the clarity that we have got to democratize the payments offering to MSMEs, and a lot of steps we've taken from the early days, including allowing digital onboarding, allowing access to collecting payments on day zero, real-time, instant. All of these meant that how can we simplify and democratize the complexity of how to collect money from your customers, which is the core aspect of what every business needs, right? So I think our belief is that MSMEs are going to be the future of the country, and they need a lot of simplification. We need to invest in a lot of democratization. And all of this needs a lot of behind-the-scenes product innovation. It isn't very simple to get it right. And we've had the firm belief and hence always focused on prioritizing for this segment.
All right. No, let's get slightly deeper into some of the things that you mentioned, that is democratization and simplification of processes, right? Because many MSMEs have limited technical expertise or resources, and they face challenges in adopting digital payments. So how does Razorpay make it easy for MSMEs with this limited technical expertise or resources to adopt digital payments? And once MSMEs are onboarded, what are the sort of operational efficiencies these businesses can expect to experience?
Yeah, multifold. And to begin with, for an MSME, sometimes it can be overwhelming on how do they integrate with their website, or how do they even send a link to their customer on WhatsApp to collect money, right? Various MSMEs do not even have a website. So our solution makes it easy for MSMEs to operate out of WhatsApp, operate out of our simplified dashboard, our app, and even the integration in a website is one click through various plethoras of plugins, SDKs available, which simplifies integration. Uh, Even for businesses that want to start the integration afresh, we made it very lightweight, 2 lines of code, 30 minutes before your pizza is delivered, your integration is done, right? So we've tried to simplify what is needed on the technical side for these businesses, because most of these businesses are experts at the business they operate in. And for them, sometimes technology can be overwhelming. And our job was to ensure we abstract all that complexity and make it as much as possible one click for them to get started, and finally for them how does the money collection happens for their consumers. And a lot of players in the payments world have exposed the complexity to businesses to think of the consumer experience layer on their own. We were the first one, being a B2B company, started thinking of the consumer experience layer and build the checkout experience for businesses, right? That what is the consumer finally going to see, and how is he or she going to make a payment, and is that simple enough for them? And as you scale into MSMEs in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, the persona of MSMEs differ, and the persona of their end consumers differ as well. And hence you got to really keep solving for not just the MSME, but their consumers as well.
All right. Give us a few examples of how, your payment solutions of your company, how have they enabled MSMEs to grow their customer base and to explore new opportunities?
Yeah. Great question again, right? And the core genesis has been that can we help MSMEs in being successful in the digital world, especially not just in having a presence, but in actually maximizing revenue and hence traction in the digital world, right? One of the MSMEs that come to my mind, top of mind, is a company called Nitroot. Nitroot is an e-commerce startup. Its primary aim is to provide Indian garment manufacturers, a place to kind of come and shine and to promote the Indian garments out there that are manufactured here, right? Make in India again. And they were facing a lot of card abandonment, so their consumers who wanted to purchase, they were dropping off, and hence there is a lot of revenue lost on the table. With our Magic Checkout offering, now their experience is mobile first, seamless. Checkout time is 5x faster. Most of the consumers, about 50-70% of their addresses pre-filled. All of this has led to their conversion doubling and their abandoned card dropping by half, right? So this business has really seen clear revenue materialization coming out of it. Another one that comes top of our mind, a very unique company called Marrow. It's an edtech company that focuses to help aspiring doctors crack entrance exam NEET. How we improve their payment experience journey across geographies, especially consumer persona where the internet connectivity was flaky, was low. Despite 5G in India, there are still pockets where the connectivity keeps breaking, especially when customers traveling. So our capabilities like native OTP, where the redirection doesn't happen, where customer can enter the OTP on a page that is built for low latency, where customer could enter ATM pin, SMS deliveries, not happening. All of those things built seamlessly on top of our checkout. This is the consumer experience layer for the business's consumer. How did we solve for the low latency consumer, and again help Marrow solve for their primary TG out there?
All right, these are great examples. More power to you and to the businesses adopting innovative payment solutions. But there's another aspect, which is fraud, and preventing fraud is a major concern for all sorts of businesses. So how are you addressing this issue to ensure security of transactions for MSMEs?
It's a great question. Being in the fintech business and in the business of moving money, I think trust and safety is something that is paramount to how we operate. Everything that we build, all the innovations that we do, have to be thought from the perspective of being fail-safe, future-proof on the security dimension, on the fraud dimension. And there are multiple things that we do along these things. Starting with our 3D Secure 2.0, which is the latest protocol to ensure the transactions are working on a more modern and a more secure protocol, both for cross-border and for domestic. And we are the first ones to pioneer this whenever innovation was being created by the networks. We built a robust risk engine internally to identify various patterns of how social hacking happens, how some of these things, patterns happen where if a consumer typically transacts from a geography X for an amount Y on merchant XYZ, and an anomaly happens, then how do we ensure we prevent the anomaly, right? While we are in the business of maximizing success rate, we also want to reduce fraud. So we build a lot of these risk engines that look at these patterns and try and prevent these patterns. And as we have scaled, why India is a country and a geography where I applaud the regulator to think of 2FA. 11 years back when 2FA was announced, the digital penetration was very low. And the clear view was that 2FA, two-factor authentication, where customers get an OTP, will ensure safety in the mind of consumers, has helped us scale. So the fraud is in general minimal, but a lot of fraud is social in nature. And that is where our pattern recognition, our investment in data science, machine learning, all of that comes in. So it continues to be a top priority for us to ensure that we invest in doing multiple things in these dimensions across the product suite, B2B collection, B2C collection, one-time recurring, all of these areas.
Right, and of course, with technology evolving fast, so quickly and so rapidly, obviously, fintechs such as you, have to try and keep one step ahead so that you're able to manage the risk of fraud. This is now my last question to you, Khilan. Talk to us about the opportunities that you see with fintechs such as yours servicing MSMEs in India, and any new products or services that you might want to share with us.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for asking that, Miloni. So very excited about two broad themes. I think theme number one is how India will scale for the next few 100 million end consumers and buyers, right? Because eventually MSMEs will be tapping into a lot of these end consumers and buyers. So various offerings targeted at the CG, including how our checkout scales to, it's already multilingual, but how it scales to what we call first-time user experience, where a buyer has never done digital transaction. And for now, thousands of different personas, right? So how we apply all the sciences behind making it simple for new users to come on board. Innovation along that dimension, very excited about. Second innovation in that dimension is our offering called UPI Turbo, which ensures that the journey is simple. It is inside a customer's app and a website, where an end buyer doesn't need to redirect to another third-party app like PhonePe, Paytm, GPay, etc. Because customer is familiar with the bank account. A lot of these happening on low latency network. A lot of these happening in coverage areas which are not the best of the world, speeds which are kind of slightly inferior. So these innovations, excited about on the theme of cracking the next few 100 million users coming online. The second theme I'm excited about is the infrastructure for the next 100 million users. I think one of the things that India is really scaling is India today, does roughly few thousand transactions per second at peak. And it's a problem that happens during the peaks of the world and the festivals of the world, and MSMEs participate in all of these festivals, and a lot of revenues generated in these festivals like Diwali's of the world. And we are investing a lot in future-proofing the infrastructure of the country by partnering with the various ecosystem stakeholders, where tokenization, Token HQ, Mandate HQ, various offerings out there to future-proof the infrastructure of the future, including our access control system, our infrastructure in UPI world, all of that. And the third theme is around how do we help businesses maximize revenue, where the example of Nitroot, where we helped optimize conversion with Magic Checkout, continuing to invest in Magic Checkout, and a plethora of other investments around our loyalty suite, around our PPI wallet, around helping businesses both acquire new customers, the demand side of it, and building a loyal customer base. Excited about, I think, all these three themes and plethora of innovations coming in, which will help MSMEs scale the digital world.
All right, and we wish you continued success. Khilan, thanks so very much for your time today.
Thank you, Milon.
We hope that these sessions have been able to offer key takeaways and insights that can be of significance for India's host of small businesses. You can also tune in to all the individual sessions on our website, economictimes.com. Once again, I would like to remind you that nominations for the prestigious ET MSME Awards 2023 are now open. Thanks a lot for joining us today.